The Diablo 4 beta has officially wrapped up. We had 2 full weekends of Diablo 4 goodness packed into the Fractured Peaks. 1 weekend if you pre-ordered, 1 weekend for everyone else. So the first weekend, for those of you guys who don't know, I was kind of down and out. I got the stomach flu, so I didn't get to spend a ton of time in the game. Very bummed out about that. So this previous weekend, I spent a ton of time breaking down and experiencing all of the classes, trying to establish a point of view on how they're kind of stacking up against one another. So this video, I want to go through and talk about first impressions. Now, please understand, these characters are up to level 25. This is basically the tutorial of Diablo 4. We don't have access to some of the classes' class mechanics. The Druid doesn't have spirit boons, and the Barbarian's missing their class mechanics. So there's just a lot missing from this. So let's talk about these different classes and what I think about each one. So we're going to start things off with the Sorcerer. So the Sorcerer was the most fun class I played during the beta. The high-powered skills mixed with good mobility and skill variety made it more exciting than some of the other classes available. I started out with a lightning sorcerer. I used chain lightning to basically vaporize huge groups of enemies, and then I made the switch to fire and I utilized a Hydra build to go full scorched earth. The enchantment system was a really cool mechanic to kind of tinker with. Sorcerers are able to take unlocked skills and then put them in a special slot to unlock new passive effects, like additional damage over time, or being able to summon a special Hydra after spending a certain amount of mana. Being able to quickly swap between all of these different enchantments I wanted to, which really kind of helped give a new dimension to build, and it allowed us to kind of achieve a different kind of play style as well. And it was just a really nice feature. I found myself swapping out skills for my enchantment slot and trying to figure out which one best fit me. But while the Sorcerer is powerful and mobile, they're still a clothy. And with that, they do require to use good positioning and be aware of the battlefield so you can avoid early deaths. Overall, this class was the top dog for me, and I had a great time with it. Next, let's talk about the Barbarian. So the Barbarian is a brutal warrior who juggles weapons of war to inflict as much pain as possible. And I really enjoyed this class. I'm not usually a Barbarian guy. I'm not. Barbarians usually don't jive with me. Now, it's not my favorite class or my playstyle, but the Diablo 4's Barbarian was very enjoyable. I started and stuck with a Bleeding Thorns build to maximize my passive damage and see what kinds of legendaries worked really well with it. Now, this class was tied with Rogue for second place in terms of fun. Now, ultimately, it did fall to the middle of the pack in terms of damage. Now, granted, like I mentioned, the Barbarian doesn't have access to their class mechanic, and because of that, you really can't blame them for not blowing the doors off of the beta. With all of that being said, there have been some creators out there who have managed to take the Barbarian and do some amazing stuff with it at level 25, even reaching critical hits of upwards of 360,000 damage at level 25, with level 25 legendaries, without having access to the class mechanic, or without having access to unique weapons, sacred, ancestral, all of these different types of things that you don't have access to, and they're still able to push it that far. It's very impressive. It's insane. So we can obviously see the potential there, and honestly, I can see the Barbarian being a top damage class in in-game as well. It's just one of those where you can stack up so many things, and that's all because of its arsenal system. Now, this is a special trait that allows Barbarians to equip 4 weapons and then assign them to certain skills. Then, as they use those weapon types, they're going to build expertise, which will then unlock new passive bonuses to really give some extra oomph to all of your abilities. So for instance, if you continue to use two-handed swords and build your expertise with two-handed swords, you're going to unlock a passive that causes damage to apply a bleeding effect. So that's not even to mention being able to stack up 4 legendary weapons and their passive effects that come with those legendary weapons all at the same time. So Barbarian has a ton going for it. It's going to scale really well into in-game, I believe. And overall, it was a very fun class. I do think it's going to be a late bloomer because, like I said, as you get legendary weapons in each slot and they level up expertise, those damage concerns, I think, will fade away. The next one I want to talk about is the Druid. So I'm going to preface this really quickly. Just like the Barbarian, the Druid does not have access to their class mechanic, and because of that, it is held back a bit, I believe. Now, with that being said, the Druid was the least fun class for me, especially early on. I'm a big Druid guy. I really liked the Druid in D2R. I always liked Shamans. I always liked that type of playstyle. It's always my sort of playstyle. And I was hyping myself up for the Druid in Diablo 4, and in my mind, it fell short. In terms of damage, it was an absolute slog at first. It was slow. It wasn't powerful. It struggled against bosses. It struggled against mobile enemies. But as you get more skill points and as you accumulate legendaries, there are some specific builds performing incredibly well. But you do have to work hard to get to that point. So a friend filled me in on a stun landslide build. After that, things drastically improved. I was able to wipe out stuff very quickly. I was able to progress through the game. I was able to have a decent time with the Druid compared to what I was doing before, where I was kind of mixing Pulverize and Tornado. I was trying to blend together the shifting and the elemental magic, and it just, those two things just weren't melding together. It formed a really kind of clunky play style if you tried to push too many of those elements together, and it just didn't work out super well. But the thing is, finding a setup that did work on the Druid was much more of a chore at this point in the game than other classes. Other classes, you could sort of just throw whatever you wanted together and it worked out incredibly well. The Druid sort of required you to have a CC all the enemies and then capitalize on it with core skills. Make sure to immobilize groups of enemies and then use landslide to deal damage. Things like that. But honestly, guys, here's the deal. The Druid, yes, was the least amount of fun. Damage-wise, it started to kind of creep up towards the middle of the pack, maybe top of the middle of the pack, by the time you got to 25 and you started to accumulate some legendaries. But the thing is, not all is lost. The build variety that the Druid possesses is fantastic. And I think later on in the game, this class is going to really, really shine. You're going to have access to your spirit animals, right? Your spirit boons, new legendaries, uniques, ancestral items, sacred items, hopefully some skills that work together very, very well. But the issue is, will players want to grind through the campaign in order to get there, right? That's the big question. Is it going to be something that people are going to sit down and go, you know what? There's a lot to capture here around level 40. I just have to get through the first 40 levels. So not entirely sure. Maybe Blizzard makes some adjustments, but that's sort of where I'm at with the Druid right now. And I know that this is a fairly divisive topic because some folks are having a great time with the Druid. Very simple. Threw it all together. Man, it's working great. Other times, it's not working so hot. And again, this is just my personal experience with the class, but overall, it was a slog that ultimately ended up being decent, but I had to really push myself to continue playing. The next class we're going to talk about is the Necromancer. So the Necro stole the top slot for let's deal the most amount of damage with the least amount of effort trophy in Diablo 4 this weekend. The class starts off incredibly strong and continues that trend all the way to level 25. The Necro has the ability to summon minions and cast spells while those same minions are wailing away on some poor soul. Now, I began with a Blight-based build and continued with that, slowly sort of accruing legendaries to support Blight and minions until I was just rolling through stuff on the battlefield. But as with most other summoner classes, it's a very polarizing playstyle. Some players really, really like it, while others think it's incredibly boring and it needs more interaction. It's just too passive. So no matter what side of the camp you're on, you do have to agree, it's powerful as hell. The Necromancer is a wildly powerful class right now. So the Necro has this special mechanic called the Book of the Dead, where you can customize your summons to gain a new passive effect. Things like increasing your maximum summons, or you can choose to sacrifice a summon to give yourself a buff instead. Now, from what I've found, I really liked having my minions out to help clear groups of enemies and do most of the dirty work while I stayed at a distance just lobbing balls of blight at people. And honestly, there really isn't too much else to say about this class, other than it'll probably get tuned down closer to launch since it did put the game on easy mode for the beta, and I'm curious to see how this class is going to scale as we get closer to endgame. Is it going to be something that plateaus out and then struggles to sort of get over the hump while all the other classes pass by? I'm not entirely sure, but it's going to be interesting to see how this one evolves. And the last class is the Rogue. So the Rogue, incredibly fun for me. I absolutely loved the Rogue. I tried both melee and ranged, both of which had some great skills. They both had great damage output, especially when you unlocked combo points. And at the end of the day, I did end up settling on a marksman build due to a legendary that I had that allowed me to proc raining arrows on any marksman skill hit. It gave a little extra sort of spice to the rotation I had going on. And I heard from a lot of people that melee was sort of the most fun aspect of the rogue, so I decided to go against the grain and just do a ranged approach. I knew melee was good, but I wanted to see how range performed, and I really liked it. So the rogue is incredibly mobile and shifty. They have a handful of mobility skills that can quickly close the gap on enemies, or you can use them to separate yourself in order to unleash your ranged attacks. The gameplay was very smooth, everything seemed to fit together very well, even switching between melee and ranged skills if you decide to play a blended approach. But while all of that flowed together, the rogue is still a dodgy class, and with that you do need to stay aware of your surroundings. They can't take as much of a beating as other classes, so you don't want to just dive headfirst into battle without thought and let yourself sit in pools of death as you slowly lose health. So you still need to be able to move out of things and stay aware of your surroundings. But overall, the damage output and the flexibility of the rogue kept me playing and engaged for much longer periods of time than some of the other classes that were available in the beta. So guys, overall, all of the classes in the beta have something that they brought to the table that was unique, that enticed players and kept them playing and interested in the class. I think in terms of the class that needs the most kind of work is going to be the Druid, because while there were some builds that really worked out very well and people really ended up enjoying it towards the end, there was a lot of individuals that wrote it off because they felt, you know what, why would I sit around and play through this when I can hop on a Necromancer and I can just roll through stuff. I can hop on a rogue and I can blow things away. I can hop on a sorcerer and I can summon stuff. I can send out magic. I can just wipe things off the grid. So all the other classes made the game a little bit easier, while the Druid made the game a little bit harder. So that's going to be something to watch to see how Blizzard handles that. Necromancer obviously was the class that I think is going to get tuned down because it was too powerful. I feel that Rogue, Barbarian, and Sorcerer are all in very good spots. They all have trade-offs. If they're high damage, they don't have as much survivability. If they have a little bit more survivability, they don't deal as much damage as some of the other classes. So from a balancing perspective, there is still some work to do, but overall, the classes I feel are in relatively good spots. But I want to hear from you guys. So in the comment section below, put a tier list together. What is your S tier class? What is your A, your B, your C, D? Are there any F tier classes? What class was your favorite? And what do you think overall about the beta? I'm going to have an impressions video up to kind of talk about the entire Diablo 4 beta itself, but I want to hear from you guys. Thank you all so much for watching. This has been Vulkan, and I'll talk to you guys next time.